That's a dad.
I forgot to mention she was funny, too. So were you always such a cannonball?
Oh, I don't know.
From a young age?
It comes from being the youngest of brothers.
Ah.
And all my cousins were also boys. You had to fight, for your place.
I wondered, rereading your books, if you were an observer or a storyteller, because I think those are slightly different paths. They can wind up in the same place. But what were you?
Well, when you grow up in a culture like ours and the kind of family that I lived in, we always had people in our house. We just never knew who would be in the house when we woke up in the morning. The door was always open. And, there's a kid's song, there's an American kid's song, Roll Over. Do you know this song? There were 10 in the bed,
yeah.
And the little one said, and then the little one is left at the end. Ours was the reverse. We all rolled over and made room for somebody else. So in some ways, we had to have a kind of a audacious imagination about life itself. So I guess I did both things. I observed intently, but I also wrote all the time.
Really? At a young age?
Yeah.
Did you have a servant growing up?
Sometimes, we had people.
Depending on how well things were going?
No, it didn't. Servants, it's an odd thing because you could be very poor and you could still have a servant because there's always somebody who's poorer than you who needed to be there. My mother taught English, and so she would teach. Some of them were trying to go to Dubai as housemaids, so they liked to learn the language. They could pick it up. So they would come and they would live with us for a while, and then they would go, and so that was the way it was. Sometimes we had somebody. Sometimes we
Would you become friendly, or would it always be at an arm's length relationship?
Well, that is why I was a girl growing up in a very male household, and my mother taught at a boys' school. So the concerns were always very male. So the women in the house, there was my mother, who was very, very busy with the boys, and there was a woman sometimes. And I observed them keenly, because, even as a young child, I wrote a lot of essays in school, and somehow all my essays would end up with a servant in it. And so when I started writing the first book, I went right back to that place of thinking about someone who would be in your house and they were often referred to as my woman. So you would say, my woman will make you some tea, my woman will do this. But I never observed them actually being allowed to be women in the way that I envisioned women to be.
And at a young age, how would you square that with, obviously your father was one of the sort of instructing tools of social justice. Did he ever speak of the relationships among the classes that you were?
Oh yes, all the time. It's a strange. So I had my father, who was this impassioned person who was very politically involved, and we followed his footsteps. We also had my mother, who loved, taught us all to sing "God Bless America" and "God Bless the Queen" and play the piano and talk about English rose gardens. So there was this singing and music and art and literature that my mother taught that mitigated some of the severe political discussions that went on in the house. So both things came at the same time.
I'm curious, because you grew up at the sort of edges of the old empire,
right.
And now you live at not the heart of, but the beginning of the current empire. And I wonder if the storytelling ethics.
I thought this empire was in decay. But thanks.
We're going to make it great again. Well, the current existing empire. Yeah, and I wonder if the ethics of storytelling that you grew up with are applicable, or if they have to be translated when you're writing from the heart of the current empire.
I mean, I always feel like, so I do political writing, and so, I'll do a lot of political.
I didn't get that from that talk.
Didn't? No, but I mean, serious, straight up, I write, opinion pieces, and those are, if you read them, are very harsh. I mean, they generally tend to bleed out anything that might mitigate my argument. So, and there's not really much room for progress there. So fiction and poetry and the essays, those are the places where I feel like you can get somewhere. I like difficult places. I like sort of the liminal places in geographies, in politics, in people, from speaking to really conservative churches in far northern Maine to hanging out with the cowboys in West Texas who are Republican and right-wing and carry guns. And
very sexy.
and they're so hot. Oh, yes, you would know. So text one to no one. So, so these.
I'm just gonna let that one go.
So the cowboy, you know, but the thing is, I like being in those places because that's where you really have to make an effort to reach down deep into those, like the larger humanity, the compassion and all, the thing that can actually change. So, so it's not different in that sense. You know?
One of the things I love about your novels is that they never ascribe a nobility to any one character. So Viet Thanh Nguyen won the Pulitzer for this wonderful book, The Sympathizer, and he's talked about it. He said, you know, as a writer of color, you're always told to make your characters, you know, good. And I reserve the right that every white writer takes, which is that I can make my main character complicated. And I feel like throughout your fiction, in A Disobedient Girl and On Salma Lane, you have these characters, and you have bullies. You have the disobedient girl. She's very bad. She makes some terrible decisions. And I wonder if, you know, part of growing up the way you did, surrounded by 13 other people, observing, if you were constantly seeing the multi-sidedness of things, or if this was just something that you acquired over time.
I mean, culturally, and this is not only true of Sri Lanka, I think many places in South Asia and Middle Eastern, there is a sense that there's more than, and I'd say that in a very general way. Of course, there are specifics that go against what I'm going to say, but we have this idea that we are not all good, we are not all bad, and that we are not all heterosexual even, you know, with the gender fluidity of each person is accepted. That's just how you are, and one is emphasized over another, and similarly with good or bad. So when I was writing on Salma Lane, for instance, I was writing a piece. It came out of me trying to write a piece on the end of the war, and the article that I was writing, they wanted this black and white thing, just like Viet is saying, where you are pointing out the good people and the bad people. And it is very easy to point out that all the people in the majority are bad and all the people in the minority are good. But it's not necessarily the case.
So the people on Salma Lane are kind of nasty from the beginning.
Yeah.
If anyone has read Freedom, the Jonathan Franzen novel, you know, when it begins and there's these people that are like whispering about each other, that's like the beginning of your book. Basically, everyone is talking about everyone else, and all the things that are happening on a macro level and politics are happening on a very small level with people. And I wonder, was that the case when you were growing up there in the 70s, that all those divisions were already being picked at?
Yeah, because I mean, that lane is a microcosm of the country. The country looks like that. Every lane it's very integrated. Of course, there are certain wealthier areas of the cities, and mostly the cities, and mostly Colombo, the capital. But every lane is mixed socioeconomically in terms of race and religion. So there is no getting away from each other. There is no place where you can retreat to and say, well, we do things this way. You had to deal with everybody else, so that brings it up. And the odd thing about Sri Lanka, I mean, we are very into walls. We build high walls and we put shards of glass in them to keep people out. But we are in each other's business. I mean, you cannot imagine. Whereas in America, you know, in my American life, there's these beautiful lawns that you can't even see where one person's lawn ends, and everybody keeps their lawns nice. And but you don't know who lives there and what's going on. You don't know the affairs and terrible things that are happening, you know.
Well, you wrote a short story for an anthology that I'm editing about inequality in America, and what I thought was so impressive about it is the inequality that exists throughout parts of South Asia is right in your face. Yeah. And also the very wealthy neighborhoods are sitting right on top of abject poverty. And yet I suspect in the neighborhood you live in Philadelphia, you would have to walk quite far to find someone on, you know, a scooter with no legs. And yet you find in these interactions the way it warps the dynamics of people. And I wonder if when you first came to the United States, if you were shocked by the degree to which inequality siloed populations, if you will.
Well, it's also, and maybe not so much in the rural United States, but in the in cities that poverty is a lonely place because we have poverty in Sri Lanka, but because of the communal way of living, money is fluid. We borrow and lend all the time, and we don't ask for it back. It's so we are not
I'm
terrorized.
just going to hit you up for a loan tonight.
I'll give it to you if you do. I mean, I've often offered my friends who say something on Facebook like, I only have this and I haven't paid my bill, and I immediately think, I'll message them and say, I don't really have a lot of money, but I could give you a little money, and they think I'm crazy because a lot of time when people in the United States, or certainly of people in our circles, will say, I don't have money, they don't really, to me that means you really don't have money. But people don't mean that here. They mean they don't have discretionary funds right now. But their 401k plan is fine. And so, and that's one of the things that I can never get over. But to get back to this business of it being lonely, poverty being lonely, because there is no other place to go. So you see people, and I look at them, and I can see that there is no option. Like, where are you going from this place? There's nobody to help you. Yeah, there are social services, but in rural communities like in West Texas with the cowboys, I mean, one of the things that I loved about them is that they help the ranchers help each other, and you can't survive if you don't. That's very familiar to me from where I grew up.
I feel you moving more towards a kind of writing of witness, which is a shift from the two novels that you've written, which are, I feel like The Disobedient Girl is in some ways, like Shamala or Pamela, do you guys read those great classics? And I feel like On Salma Lane, it picks up and is sort of Dickensian about where it's from. And now I feel like the work that you're doing is impatient with the possibility that a novel is a consumable form of empathy, that you can read it, you can feel like you've been there, and you can think, that's a great, terrible thing that happened in that country. This family, they're amazing and real to me, but what do you do from now? And I feel like in the poems you just read, the essay you just read, you're challenging people to just sit, to only read it. And what does that mean for the future of your fiction? And do you think that kind of fiction can be written?
Yeah, I mean, the new book that I've written also goes back to themes of, there's war and there's all those dislocations of war, but it's about memory and how people, to whom we entrust memory and what we choose to believe about ourselves. And it's set in an unnamed country in East Asia, Middle East / and a Pacific island that is also unnamed. But I'm trying to look at what happens when you give up defining yourself for yourself and you take what someone else says about you as real. So I guess it's an amalgam of both things that I do that I'm trying to do in that book. It's not out yet. All of the books I feel very strongly have to do with more than the place they're set. So A Disobedient Girl, there are 15-year-old girls who fall in love or use their sexuality the way Lata does in A Disobedient Girl in the United States. These are not traits particular to Sri Lankans. So I try to reach for that so that when you're reading it or On Salma Lane, you see the way incremental changes that you are not addressing or correcting or challenging become then insurmountable obstacles, and now you're powerless because you've given that power over in little ways. It's sort of bled out of you in little drips. There is just to be a little lighter, there's a quote that I've always loved. It says, raising children is like being pecked to death by chickens. So, it's kind of like that, except in this larger political way.
You'd know you have 3 of them.
I do have 3 of them, so, but
across your books, I feel like the plate tectonics of politics is always shifting along the axis of desire to some degree. And I wonder, growing up where you have, if there was any restrictions about how you expressed or embodied that forms of desire and how they were narrativized in the culture that you grew up in.
And this is being recorded, so my countrymen may rue the day that I was set out to say these things here. But we have we don't generally have divorces, for instance. It's not common.
There are no gay people in Italy either, for example.
I mean, we don't really try, but we also don't expect our marriages to fulfill everything. So people have affairs, and if they're having an affair, the local taxi driver might say, let you know that they know by saying something like, oh, I saw your friend getting off the bus the other day. It's a way of letting you know, like, if you want to have a tryst and you need me to take you somewhere, I'm available. So it's like...
that's a very compressed tweet.
It is. We're very good at it. It's very subtle, but it's you know exactly what you're saying. And yes.
I'm just looking at this bird. I'm wondering what it signifies tonight.
Yeah. Do you really want to know?
I do, actually.
I'll tell you its name, and then you might wish you didn't ask.
Let's leave that for when it says one minute left.
Okay, all right. Okay.
So you were saying about the way that there's a constant kind of undercurrent of
undercurrent of desires and expression, and in both men and women. It's not like it's not like only men have affairs and women are not supposed to. And it's not to say, that my countrymen are running around having infidelities or
we just
sweeping
pretend
the
it doesn't
nation.
happen in the United States.
Right. I don't know. Where I live on the main line in Philadelphia, everybody's very
They're well
uptight.
curated.
They're very well curated.
Their affairs.
Along with their grass of every kind.
Oh, well, I'm just going to let that joke sink in for a second. But what did your parents think when you started to write the books that you did? Because obviously, one of the sort of sonic booms that happens in your books has to do with speaking the truth. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of places in the world, including even probably in this room, where you're encouraged not to speak the truth.
Mm-hmm. A Disobedient Girl, I realized when I finished the book and I sent it home for my parents to read, my mother said, I don't know if you realize, but there's a lot in this book that reminds me of me. And I thought to myself, that's because it is about you. But I took, various details of her life, and so Bissau for me is exploring in some ways. I mean, I didn't do it consciously, but I realized after the fact I was basically exploring what would have happened to her if she had done what she did. I always believe that we have to be good to the people who raise us and our families, and that even if there are places or ways in which they have failed us, you don't put that out for everybody else to, they have a right to their own stories, no matter how bad or good they have been.
To some degree, I think that's the definition of home, is the ability to wound you, but you can't be entirely disloyal to it.
Yeah. But you can still be tender, you can still have some compassion. And
do you think it's possible to have two homes?
Yes, I think you find homes wherever you can. I mean, particularly now when you're not able to be in one place. I think it's hard, certainly for me, I just wrote an essay on Monday when I came here. I had the essay that I was writing, and it was about telling my daughters that they should marry Americans, and this is very odd for them to hear, because on any given day I can tell them 1,000 things that are wrong with the United States, but I feel like marriage is a very difficult thing, and if you add this all cross-cultural thing to it, then it becomes even more difficult. And I was tracing back the fact that you make decisions to travel, to live in another country, to marry somebody from another culture on a whim almost, and then you don't anticipate the difficulties that come with that. Which is not to say that I regret the choices I've made, that I've been here. I feel like I carry the challenge that was given to me by my parents, both of them, to do good things wherever I am. So I have more homes in this country than my husband does. And he's the true blue Yankee. He's not as comfortable around the country as I am.
Well, there's more margins in this country than we often think.
Yeah, I suppose.
I imagine that given where you're from and what you write and how you see the world, that you are probably you have an easier time moving in those margins.
Yeah. And so charming, too.
That too. And carrying a
conversation piece.
A conversation piece.
I come equipped.
But tell me about these poems, because I remember when you emailed me from Marfa and you told me you were starting to write poems. I thought, oh my God, she's taking on another genre. And hearing them tonight, they're truly extraordinary. And one of the things that comes through them is rage, is anger. And anger so often is kind of like a blowtorch to quality. If you want to really melt the goodness out of a statement, say it very angrily. But you've made it a refining fire, and I wonder in poetry if there are any models that you're looking at when you do that, because I thought of some, but I wondered if you had them.
I mean, while I was in MAF, when I'm writing fiction, I generally don't read any fiction, so I only read poetry, and I read a lot of poetry. There's lots of people I admire. I didn't grow up learning to write. I don't have an MFA. I've never taken creative writing classes, so I learned by reading. So I guess I can't have a model really, because if I had a model, then I would do what they do. And because I didn't have the training to just read and take only that and not do the other thing. So I guess I read a wide variety of things. So when I was in MAFA, I read a lot of W.S. Merwin and Anne Carson, whom I love, and which is not in any of this work, but it's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking about language, and it's a way of thinking about how you put words together and what moves you. I was doing an interview before I came here, and I said, I don't write about anything that doesn't really, light a fire in me. So I care about the environment, but I'm more willing to talk about someone like Terry Tempest Williams or Barry Lopez writing about the environment than taking on writing the environment myself, because it doesn't. I don't get impassioned about it. But social justice stuff that have to do with race or public education and access and girls, these kinds of things, Palestine, the foreign policy, those things move me. So then I go to that. So in the poetry too, I'm glad that there was a but when you were talking about that. There was a but. Yours is different when you were talking about the poetry.
Of course,
so
yeah. But I wonder to what degree you feel this way. I sometimes feel I bemoan, and the Lannan Center and this theater is not a good example, because they bring the writers that are like you, that are fellow travelers, that don't see a division between social justice and art. But I do feel in this country, you mentioned Merwin and his period, the poets of the 60s were all terribly politically active. They were translating, and I feel right now there's a kind of, it's not a wasteland, but there's a calm against that. And I wonder if you feel in this period that you have to look transnationally in order to find fellow travelers who are activated by injustices.
Well,
or if there are more people in America than we might know that are.
Well, you do that really well. I mean, with Freeman's and all of the work that you do, you bring all the voices from all over the world, and you go looking for them. You don't just take the people who come to you. I mean, you really. I'm so impressed by the work that you do.
Thank you, sister.
Yeah, it's a little plug. No, but it's true. I mean, you were, for me, one of the people I admire the most in American letters, because I think you do that work. But I also, and certainly I know that there is a transnational contingent of voices to do this work, but I also feel like, well, I am here in the United States and I'm part of the American literary world. So what can I do to transform that? Because that needs to be transformed. So the anthology for me was, it combined those things.
It's a very brave thing.
Well, thank you, but it wouldn't be considered brave in my family. It's just what I have to get done.
I wonder about this. You grew up where political urgency and violence were very closely connected, and now you live in a very safe, relatively community where a lot of these pressures that you feel and that make you active are news-oriented and abstract, far away. And I wonder how, you have to have a completely different MO to some degree to keep going, no?
No, I mean, I just want to make things different. I mean, I just see it and I think, like public education in the United States, when I'm teaching in college classes and the students talk to me about this and this and this, and I say, well, you trace it back to how you were taught. What were you taught in the public schools? And then, well, how can you expect something different? Because this is what you're taught, and you're not even taught your own history. I mean, American history is not taught from I mean, in Sri Lanka, you're taught Sri Lankan history and world history in tandem from the time you're in kindergarten. And it's layered as you go on, so you get more and more and more. In the United States, you'll do, the Civil War in 7th grade, and I think, what is that? I mean, you should be learning it from to locate yourself in history. So for me, I feel making these writers, kind of pushing them a little with great help from a lot of people who helped me with that anthology, like Jeff and Tess Gallagher and Marilyn Hacker. All these people stepped forward and said, what about this one, and let's get them involved. And I think that the more that you and I do these things, the more transformed we can make the community that we are a part of.
Well, and one thing I really love that you're doing is you're yoking the African American literary history into the mainstream in ways that it has always been there. Mm-hmm. That our earliest poet, Phyllis Wheatley, African American slave who was taught to read and write, and so African American literary history is always running in tandem. Mm-hmm. And you've looked to James Baldwin, to Ralph Ellison. A lot of the people you mentioned tonight are black. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you, the great book of last year was Ta-Nehisi Coates's, The World in Me. Mm-hmm. And in that, he does this wonderful thing where he says, we're not going to talk only about progress. Mm-hmm. Progress will make you depressed. Mm-hmm. But let's just talk about struggle. Right. And I began tonight talking about struggle as a thing because I feel in your work, you talked about hope, but I feel like you find hope in struggle. And I wonder, is that true? Or do you really feel like progress is an achievable thing?
I do. I think transformation is achievable. I think defeat is not inevitable. I am very optimistic about things changing. I fight to win. I mean, I think that it's not that I'm only going to take on the thing that I think is winnable, but I don't fight to lose. So that is the hope that is there inside the things that I do.
So what's the bird's name? Donald Trump?
Hamame Paloma. Hamame is the Arabic word for a golden bird, basically, but it is also used to refer to the man's equipment.
That is a great place to end. Rue Freeman, it's a pleasure.
It's great being here with you.